Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the open session of the Audit Committee meeting. And I would like to call the meeting to order. And we start with the land acknowledgement. And I would like to acknowledge that the Peel District School Board's head office is located on Treaty 13A of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm grateful to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation as the caretakers of this land and recognize the benefits I receive from this land. I also acknowledge and give thanks to the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who have walked before us. This land continues to be the home for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and many who are students in Peel District School Board schools. We are all treaty people. Treaties are promises to protect and share the land. As we all mutually benefit from this land, we must remember that we borrow this land from the future generations. How can we uphold this promise to protect and share the land? I would like everyone to take a moment to think about what they can do today and moving forward. The Peel Board is committed to amplifying the voices of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students, their families, and their communities. We will continue to learn the true history of this place, and we will celebrate the vast contributions First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples have made and continue to make to the story of Canada. Moving on to the item number 3, approval of agenda. I would like to ask Trustee Davis, would you please move the item?
With honor, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on the agenda? All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Item number 4, declaration of conflict of interest. Any declaration of conflict of interest to any of the items on agenda? Seeing none, moving to the next item. Minutes 5.1 Audit Committee meeting minutes from September 30th, 2022. Mr. Chade, would you please move the minutes of the last committee meeting for approval?
With honor, Madam Chair.
Sorry about that. Any additions, questions, and comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. We're moving to item number 6, old business. And we have Audit Committee work plan. And this will be presented to us by Controller Tanya.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Sohi, attaches the Audit Committee work plan. As in the past, the plan itemizes the various accountabilities of the Audit Committee. And today's meeting will be covering section 9.1, 2, and 4 through the coverage of the financial statements and BDO's presentation that we had in committee. Additionally, we'll be covering section 9.2 and 9.3 through RIAT's status update, as well as their presentation through in committee on the procurement engagement. This meeting as well, we'll be having section 9.5, which speaks to the director's report on compliance for the year. As this is wrapping up 21-22, we are also covering section 15.1 and 3, which is the annual report to the board, and then section 15.2, which is the annual report to the ministry. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tanya. Trustee Davis, would you please move the item on the floor?
With honor, Madam Chair.
Any questions, any comments? All in favor of receiving this item 6.1?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Carried. We're moving forward to the new business, 7.1, draft consolidated financial statements prepared by Controller Tanya. Tanya, would you like to present the drafted financial statements to the committee?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. Can I get control, Mark, of the so I can present?
Sorry?
I'm asking to share my screen.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You should see it.
Okay. Just okay. So everybody can see the screen now.
Yep.
Through you, Chair. So I will be covering the financial statements of 21-22 this afternoon, and I'm going to predominantly talk about the balance sheet and income statement. So before I start, I wanted to take the opportunity and time to thank staff. Again, we've had a challenging year from a staffing perspective and for some vacancies. So I really want to thank staff for coming together and being able to present this to you today. As well, I'd obviously like to thank our auditors, BDO, who have done another very efficient audit and helped support us bring these to you on a timely basis. So before I start, I also want to talk about, for those that have reviewed the statements, you may notice some additional disclosures, which I will try to highlight as I go through the statements. So most of these additional requirements are from the ministry as a result of an audit that they received from the Auditor General of Ontario, and that review actually required school boards to provide a little bit more transparency and more consistency across all boards. So there is a few slight differences in how we're presenting our statements. And also I wanted to point out that when we're looking at comparing 2021 to 2022 in terms of fiscal years, those years were obviously impacted by COVID, but impacted very differently. So prior year, we had a lot more online learning with minimal physical presence in schools, whereas 21-22 what can be characterized with a lot more in-person learning, although obviously there were still significant impacts of COVID into how we did our operations in the year. So as we go through, I'll speak to some of those impacts. So starting with the cash, as you can see on your screen, compared to last year, our cash balance has dropped. Partly it's because last year we did have a surplus, so we did have more cash on hand due to some areas where we did underspend due to COVID and the fact that we were working remotely. To that end, the ministry has actually they increased what they called their delayed grants. So they've actually withheld some of our cash flow this year in recognition that we did have cash on hand. So that has brought our cash balance lower. Additionally, we had more capital spending this year. And again, just a reminder, for capital, we typically have to spend ahead of time, and then the ministry will reimburse us a couple of times a year. So initially, we do have to fund our own capital. And so again, that brought our cash balance down, as well as some other normal AP reductions. Going to accounts receivable, you will notice that there's an increase in terms of our receivable. That is mainly due to the municipalities projecting higher property tax revenues in 21-22. We also have receivables from both the city of Mississauga and Brampton in relation to some shared facilities with them, and through that we are receiving some funds from them, and that's outstanding. And finally, within accounts receivable, we do also have our benefit trusts. So those are we have about 6 trusts that deliver benefits to our employees, and there's about $2.5 million in receivables as once they settle the year end, we are expecting some funds back from them. Moving on to accounts receivable from the Government of Ontario. Again, this represents both our operating and capital funding receivable from the ministry. And generally the increase from last year, as I mentioned before, there's a delayed grant. So what the ministry does, so that we don't have the cash sitting in our bank account and providing interest, they instead withhold some of the cash flow and it is still our funds, meaning it's delayed, and that therefore our receivable grows in that respect. And so because they did increase the delay grant, the receivable automatically from the ministry does go up, and this is offset by some of the decreases in our capital funding receivable, which mean they did forward some funds for us in terms of our capital acquisitions. Moving to temporary borrowing, you will notice a decline in our temporary borrowing. Now, our temporary borrowing is solely for our land purchases, and we pay this down as we receive the educational development charges that flow through us from the municipalities. And again, this year we did have greater inflow than we had in the past year, as well as we also had a purchase of land, which is netted from a purchase land. We also purchased Mount Pleasant number 5, so that netted to decrease the amount that we received in terms of the EDC charges. Accounts payable, that's mainly due to normal activity. Going to deferred revenue. So our deferred revenue, as mentioned, I think in before, is anytime there is a specific grant for a specific purpose, if we do not fully utilize that grant, we can defer it for future use. So that's the deferred revenue represents that. And in this year, we did have to defer some amounts of PPE, so COVID PPE that the ministry did send us some inventory of products, and we were asked to set it up and defer that. And that's about 3.8 million of that, as well as we did sell a property. And so again, by ministry guidelines, upon sale, we can defer that revenue for future use. Moving to the next line, which is retirement and other employee future benefits. Most of the benefits on retirement are for a set group of given employees. And so as these employees retire, this liability will continue to decrease. There is, however, an increase this year with respect to WSIB. Because that's on our general population, and as staff return to physical locations, we did experience an increase in that expense of about 700,000. Net debenture debt has decreased by about 33 million, almost 34 million, and net debentures or debentures were how capital was actually funded in the past by the ministry. The ministry no longer funds us through debentures. But however, they do fund us both the principal and interest repayment. So again, this line will continue to decrease as we pay down that debt, but obviously future capital purchases, we are funded as we go versus through debentures. Okay, so then the only other line I was going to talk to here, because prepaids are comparable to last year. Inventories represent, as I mentioned before, it's the PPE that we were provided by the ministry, and tangible capital assets increased this year. And that increase is related to purchases of another property, Mount Pleasant number 5, as well as increase in our amortization expense due to higher capital expenditures. So understanding that financial statements are complicated, I could take a question on the balance sheet before I go on to the operating statement. I don't know if anybody has questions on the balance sheet. So in terms of our operating statement, now our operating statement again is there's some slight change in presentation here. And just to give you some context in terms of, so I'm not repeating myself in some areas. First of all, the board did have an enrollment decline over last year. So certainly we did feel the impacts in terms of funding due to the enrollment decline. And the enrollment decline obviously is contributed through based on several factors. There was an element of COVID. There's obviously been movement out of the GTA. So we have had families move out of GTA as homes have become more expensive. Immigration has not fully recovered. And we also have still not fully recovered in terms of the international students that come to our board. So those various factors did cause us to have additional enrollment decline over even the prior year. I mean, that has been mitigated by the ministry somewhat because this year we did receive COVID funding as well in a few areas. So that did mitigate some of our revenues. And I think the ministry still understanding that COVID impacts, they did provide some incremental funding to support boards in that transition. So if we look at the grants for student needs this year, you will see that they are broken up into two. One is the provincial legislative grants. The other is education property tax. That is one of the changes the ministry asked all boards to do. So it's clear for the reader that the funding comes both from the ministry and from property taxes. So those two together are grants for student needs. Additionally, we have separated out provincial grants other, and that's representative generally of all the specific funding that the ministry provides, generally through transfer payment agreements. And so in this year, we did have significant funding through there come for COVID with respect to some staffing. We had some transportation funding as well as SPECID and mental health in terms of COVID funding that came through the line. The reason that it's varying significantly from budget is because a lot of times when the ministry does announce some of this additional funding, they do it in year. So it's after the budget has been prepared. So historically, our budget, we are generally over our budget because the ministry sometimes will do these TPAs after the fact. School-generated funds represent the activities in the school, as can be seen in both the revenue and expenses. Both these areas have started to recover somewhat in terms of COVID. So as I mentioned before, in looking at 2021, there was minimal activity because the schools were online versus 21-22, whereas there was some resumption of things like field trips and pizza days, but obviously not even to what we had anticipated in terms of our budget, and definitely not what we've had in past years either. The federal grant, again, those are just federal funding. The only other thing I was going to mention on this slide is, in the revenue side, is the last line, the fees and revenues from other sources, which has a relatively significant increase. And that is predominantly an increase in our EDC, or the educational development charges that we receive on land. And this year, the increase was about 11.7 million just on that line alone. And just a reminder, anything that we get through EDCs, we cannot use it toward anything other than land purchases. And in this particular case, because we do have temporary borings on land, anything that we do receive, we do draw down our temporary borings based on the balance sheet. In terms of instruction, so again, the instruction line speaks to the in-class and the teachers, and this is where most of our spending is. And as you can see this year, there's a variance. If you look over last year, there's an increase, even though we have an enrollment decline, but some of that increase is due to the fact that we had a lot more COVID spending. So this year, being in physical locations, we had a lot more teacher sickness. So we had coverage on that. Again, last year, for example, we wouldn't have had lunchroom supervisors. We'd have had this year. So there's a lot of effects now that we're currently in the schools. And so that's the variance from last year. But in terms of our budget, we're relatively online as what we had planned. Going to transportation, you will see that transportation, we're a little bit under our budget, but just as a reminder, this is our budget versus our funding. We're still about 4.2 million over our funding, because our funding is about 55 million. So people accommodation, this is the funding for the physical operations of our schools. And you can see that we do have more costs than in prior, and again, that's being back into physical locations, the additional cleaning requirements that we have within the schools, and obviously, you know, through that, we've also incurred some additional custodial costs that and PPE costs for cleaning. We've talked about school generated funds. The only other one I was going to mention is other. So you'll see a significant increase in other costs. So this year, the ministry has asked us to recognize the use of PPE, both in the revenue line as well as in expenses. So in terms of the PPE used this year in our schools, it was about 22.4 million. So you will see that both in the 28 million as well as it's not as obvious, but it's within the GSN grant as well. So it's in both in and out, but again, and that's a new requirement for the ministry, and that's why you don't see it within the budget. So it's only in our actual, that's within the 28 million. With that, between our revenue and expenses, we are ending this year in a deficit of $3.16 million. Any questions on that before I just go quickly through some of the notes? I'm only going to go to a couple of notes, and mainly because they are a little bit changes or new. So the first note I will speak to is note 6. So note 6, you'll see has a little bit more detail where we have actually a subtotal on the net debenture debt for the OFA loans. Now, these loans represent prior capital debentures, as I mentioned, and these continue to decline as pay them off. But the ministry has wanted us to be clear on the fact that this is a related party transaction. So there is a corresponding note for this in note 19, I believe. Going to note 9, grants for student needs. Again, this is a new note, and this is where the ministry again wanted us to provide greater clarity of how significant a component the GSNs are. So you will note in this note, it talks that the grants for student needs represent 93% of our revenues. And they also wanted us to highlight that there is an actual split between the fact that some of these funds are flowing through the province versus some of them are flowing through the education property tax. So note 17, again, we did have this note before, but the ministry did want us to add a little bit more to this note, as well as indicate clearly the percentage of our share of the consortium. And so you can see here that our share of the consortium is 71% based on our expenses. And you will also see here where I mentioned before that although from a budget perspective, we were in line in terms of transportation, but in terms of our funding, we are in fact overspent in terms of that by about 4.2 million. Note 19, as I mentioned, now we are being required to add a related party disclosure note with respect to the OFA. So that sits here and ties on to the note 16 that I previously showed. Lastly, I was just going to touch on again, as required, there's a comparative figures note because there's been some changes that we had to make sure that it's aligned to last year as well, and the subsequent events note. So the subsequent events note speaks to the fact that we did sell a property after year end while the auditors were here, so we've included that, as well as the fact that, again, board has already approved, but we are also in the process of selling 2 additional properties in the coming year. And with that, I'm happy to take any additional questions on anything I've presented.
Thank you, Tanya. And I know it's a lot of work that goes behind these numbers. Your 10-minute presentation is actually many days and nights of working and many people working on this, putting this whole financial statement together. Thank you so much. And I would like to say thank you to your whole team that worked with you. I'd like to ask the committee members if they have any questions regarding any of the items on these financial statements. Yes, Trustee Benjamin.
No, I don't have. I just said no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So this item is for the approval. And if none of the committee members have any of the comments or any questions, may I ask Trustee Benjamin for you to put it on the floor, please?
Yes, surely. Thank you. Please put it on the floor.
And everyone in favor of approval of this item?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. 7-point item received, carried. We're moving on to 7.2. We have a compliance report for fiscal year 2021-2022. I would ask our Associate Director, just Paul Gill, to present it to the committee members, please.
So, Madam Chair, as indicated by the letter signed by your director, during the 2021-22 fiscal year, nothing has come to our attention that will lead us to believe that the board was not compliant with the current federal and provincial acts, regulations, and statutes. Happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. May I ask Trustee Davis to put it on the floor, please?
With honor, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions by any of the committee members on this item? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Kevin. Thank you, Associate Gill. We're moving on to the item number 7.3. It's an audit committee report for year 2021 to 2022. And this report is provided to the Ministry of Education. And the report is prepared by Controller Tanya.
Again, thank you, and through you, Chair Sohi. So attaches the audit committee report for the 2021-22 year that goes to the Ministry of Education. And as per the Ontario Regulation 36110, it requires us to report on all READ audit engagements done and whether any enrollment audits are planned. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sinha, would you please move the report on the floor?
With pleasure, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Controller? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Carried. Thank you. We're moving on to the item number 8, report from officials and staff. And we have item 8.1, Appeal to the School Board's regional internal audit update to be received by the committee members. And the report will be presented to the committee members by our Senior Regional Internal Audit Manager, Paula Head.
Okay, thank you. So through the chair, this item is our routine update. As of the last meeting, we had 2 engagements that were outstanding from previous years, the IT assets and then the purchasing engagement. So the purchasing engagement is now complete and the 21-22 plan is now considered closed. Work on the IT assets audit is now being reviewed and a closing meeting is set for next week to discuss the results with management. So as we wrap up the old engagements over the next couple of months, we'll start to plan the 2 current year engagements. Once the IT asset audit is complete, I'll also have a resource available to devote to follow-up engagements across the 6 boards in our region. These activities include our annual update to see the progress that management has made in addressing audit findings and recommendations from the previously issued audit reports. And there will also be some follow-up engagements planned throughout the year. Now, finally, I do have a quick verbal update related to audit committee training, which came about after I submitted this report. So with the recent elections, many boards have some turnover in audit committee membership. And as a result, a need was identified for province-wide training for audit committees. This training will provide an introduction to audit committees for newly appointed members, as well as a refresher for existing members. So the regional internal audit managers from across the province have agreed to take on this initiative. So in order to provide a consistent message across all school boards, we'll be offering a series of 4 one-hour lunch and learns from various presenters that will cover topics such as the Regulation 36110, governance, and the 6 main duties of audit committees. So internal audit, internal controls, external audit, financial reporting, risk management, and compliance. So these sessions will be virtual, and they'll offer information such as a basic overview of these topics and the types of questions to ask. And time will also be made available at the end for participant questions. Now, although details are still being finalized, it's expected that these sessions will take place starting at noon on Tuesdays from January 17th to February the 7th. So for those who miss one or more of the sessions, they will be recorded and details will be provided on where the recordings can be accessed. And further details will be shared with the sector when they're available. So that's my update, and I'd be happy to take any questions that the committee has.
Thank you, Paula. And I think this is great that we have the training sessions, because I remember when we started with this committee, we didn't have any training, and it was not a pleasant experience to start with no background into these kind of, the subjects. May I ask Ms. Sachdev to put this item on the floor?
With pleasure, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So any questions by the committee members regarding this? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Carried. Thank you so much. We are moving on to the item number 9, communications for action I've received, seeing none. Item number 10, adoption of the in-committee reports. May I ask Mr. Sinha to move the adoption of the in-committee reports, please?
With pleasure, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, Karen. Item number 11, adjournment. And before we adjourn today's meeting, this is my last meeting for audit committee as well as for the Peel District School Boards. And I just want to say it was an honor to work with you all. It's been 3 years since I served this committee as a chair, and it was a great learning experience. And I really want to say thank you to all the members, Adi, Gil, Tanya, Paula, everyone, for your patience. And many times while I was learning, and also for giving this opportunity and making all the committee members and us, including myself, you guys were always available, so making us learn all that into this kind of a smooth transition when we just came in. And then specifically this committee, where I did not have much of a background into any working with these numbers or any accounting field, but it was my honor to be here. And thank you so much once again. And thank you so much, Trustee Benjamin, Trustee Davis, and both the committee members, the public members in here, for your patience and for everything. Thank you. And I wish you all the very best for the coming years with the Peel District School Board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best to you too, Miss Trustee Sohi.
Thank you. Trustee Benjamin, would you please move the adjournment?
Yes, I will, Madam Chair, for the last time.
That's true. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you, everyone, and wish you all have a great day and a great year ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Thank you
Take
to
care.
everybody. Thank you.